in a world that often forgets the dreams of the elderly, where gray hair and wrinkles are mistaken for irrelevance, and where the spotlight too often fades as the years pass, one woman's voice shattered the silence. This is not just the story of a performance, it is the story of a voice rediscovered, of dignity reclaimed, of a soul that refused to be forgotten. Her name was Margaret Elaine Foster, a 78-year-old retired librarian from the quiet little town of Willow Spring. To most, she was just another elderly woman, a familiar figure in the community who shuffled down the sidewalk with her cane, wore wide, brimmed floral hats, and fed birds in the park while talking to her cat Mozart. But what no one saw, what time had hidden, was the passion she had once carried in her heart. A passion for music, for singing, for being heard. One fateful evening, as the annual Willow Springs Got Spark talent show approached, a cruel prank was born, thoughtless, childish, and meant to humiliate. Margaret's name was submitted to the list of performers as a joke. No one thought she would show up. No one expected her to sing, and certainly, no one expected her to change the room, let alone the entire town. But what began as laughter at her expense ended with tears in the eyes of those who heard her. The prank became a performance. The performance became a moment, and the moment became a legend. This is the story of a woman who walked onto a stage as the butt of a joke, and walked off it as a standing ovation echoed behind her. A story that proves you're never too old to dream, never too old to rise, and never, ever too old to sing. The day of the talent show arrived. The school auditorium was buzzing with energy. Families filled the seats, students lined up backstage, and the lights above the stage slowly dimmed as the show was about to begin. Backstage, performers were practicing their routines. Some were adjusting costumes, others were nervously pacing. Tyler and his friend sat near the front row, laughing among themselves, watching act after act with mild interest. A little girl played a violin piece. Two brothers did a silly dance routine. Then came a magic act that got a few chuckles from the crowd. Then something unexpected happened. The announcer walked onto the stage, holding a clipboard. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome our next performer, Margaret Foster, singing a solo piece." There was a pause in the crowd. Some people whispered. A few chuckled. Tyler's jaw dropped. "No way," he muttered. From the side of the stage, slowly, Margaret Foster stepped into the spotlight. She wore a long navy dress with small white flowers. Her cane tapped lightly on the wooden floor with each step. Her wide glasses rested firmly on her nose, and her gray hair was pinned back neatly. The room fell into silence. She reached the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and smiled gently. "Good evening," she said softly. "I'd like to sing a song I haven't sung in many, many years." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone near the back let out a quiet laugh. But Mrs. Foster didn't flinch. She nodded at the sound technician, and the soft, slow melody of a piano began to play from the speakers. Then she began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, almost fragile. But then as the melody rose, so did her voice. Strong, steady, rich with emotion. It was the kind of voice that made the room feel smaller, warmer. The kind of voice that carried memories, pain, love, life. The audience, stunned into silence, listened. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even Tyler stopped smirking. By the time she reached the second verse, her voice filled the entire auditorium. There was a tremble in it, not from weakness, but from something deeper. Real feeling. A history lived through music. Tears welled in some eyes. Parents looked at each other, surprised. Even the rowdy teenagers in the back had gone still. When the final note echoed through the hall, Margaret lowered the microphone and took a small step back. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the crowd rose, one by one, to their feet. Applause burst through the room, real, long. Some clapped with hands above their heads. Others wiped their eyes while cheering. Margaret smiled softly, bowed her head once, and slowly walked off the stage. Backstage, no one said a word at first. Then a stagehand whispered, "That was incredible." Even Tyler sat speechless, his usual grin gone. He looked down, unsure what to think. Narrator, what started as a joke had become something unforgettable. What they thought would make people laugh ended up making them cry. No one would ever look at Margaret Foster the same way again. Classical music played softly from an old radio in the corner. The living room was warm and tidy, filled with little touches of another time. Lace doilies on the armrests, a half-finished scarf draped over a ball of yarn, and a teacup resting gently on a saucer. Margaret sat in her favorite chair by the window, a soft blanket over her knees, and her cat Mozart curled up nearby. She looked over at him with a fond smile. "Margaret," gently, Oh, Mozart, what a quiet life we lead, hem. Just books, memories, and a whole lot of peppermint tea. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through her. Outside, the afternoon sun cast golden light across her front steps. Then the doorbell rang. Margaret looked toward the door, surprised. She set her cup down and rose with care, gripping her cane. Her steps were slow but steady as she made her way to the door. On the front mat was a single sheet of paper, slightly curled from the breeze. She picked it up. Margaret L. reading aloud. Willow Springs Got Spark Talent Show. Performer Margaret Foster. Solo vocal. She blinked, taken aback. For a moment she thought it was a mistake. Then she smiled, a small, knowing kind of smile. Margaret, well now, that can't be right. I never signed up. It must be a joke. She turned to go back inside but paused in the doorway. Her fingers ran across the flyer again, lightly tracing her name. Narrator. It had been so long. So many years since she had stood on a stage. So many years since anyone had asked her to sing. But something stirred inside her, a flicker. A memory. Of youth. Of music. Of that one night long ago, when her voice filled a room and the world fell quiet to listen. She walked back to her chair and sat down slowly, staring at the flyer. Her cat hopped up beside her, purring softly. Margaret, softly, almost to herself, I wonder if I still have it in me. She glanced out the window, where the autumn leaves were beginning to fall. And for the first time in years, she thought about singing. The room was silent except for the gentle hum of old recording equipment. It was all in black and white, like an old film in her memory. The microphone stood tall, polished and cold. A young woman stood behind it, 19 years old, full of dreams, wearing a simple dress and hopeful eyes. Margaret. Her voice had just finished echoing through the studio. She looked toward the glass window of the control booth, waiting, hoping. The door creaked open. A man in a pressed shirt and tie stepped in, holding a clipboard. Manager, you've got talent, Margaret. No doubt about that. Young Margaret smiling nervously, thank you, sir. Manager, sighing as he flipped through papers, but we're looking for someone younger. Someone with more of a look, you know, marketable. Young Margaret's smile faded. Young Margaret, but I have a voice. Doesn't that matter? Manager with a shrug. Sometimes it's not enough. She stood there for a moment, stunned. The microphone beside her now seemed larger, heavier, more distant. The manager gave her a polite nod and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Narrator, that was the moment. The moment her dream slipped through her fingers. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because the world couldn't see past what it wanted on the outside. She left the studio that day with no contract, no second chance, just silence, and life moved on. There were jobs to take, bills to pay, people to take care of, and slowly the music inside her faded. Not all at once, but little by little, until it became just a quiet hum in the background of her life. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that settles deep into the walls. Margaret stood in front of her mirror, the flyer still sitting on the table behind her. Her reflection stared back. Older now, face softened with time, but the eyes still held a flicker of something young. She reached up and gently touched her cheek, as if remembering the girl she once was. Margaret, the whispering to herself, maybe, just once more, for me, for the girl who never got the chance. Her voice cracked slightly, but not from age, emotion. She looked down, took a breath, and began to move slowly through the house. She opened an old drawer in the hallway, rummaging carefully until she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, tucked beneath layers of yellowed tissue paper, was a record, her voice, pressed into vinyl decades ago. She carried it to the old record player in the corner of her living room. It creaked as she opened the lid, the mechanics stiff with age. She placed the record on the turntable and gently lowered the needle. Soft crackling filled the air. Then her younger voice began to play, clear, smooth, and full of hope. Margaret sat down and listened for a long moment. Her eyes misted over. Later, she stood in front of the mirror again. A soft piano track played from a speaker on the counter. She began to hum along, quiet at first, then louder. Her voice wavered but held strong. In the days that followed, she practiced. Every morning after tea, she would stand in her living room and sing. She warmed up her voice, practiced old breathing techniques, read sheet music she hadn't touched in years. Her cat sat nearby as if quietly cheering her on. She didn't tell anyone, no neighbors, no friends, not even the lady who brought her groceries every Thursday. This was just for her, not for a stage, not for applause, but for the girl she used to be, the one who never stopped singing, only got quieter, and little by little her voice returned. Not perfect, not flawless, but real, wiser, stronger in a different way. The Willow Spring Community Center buzzed with energy. Popcorn machines whirred in the corner, folding chairs squeaked under shuffling parents, and laughter echoed from every corner. Children darted between rows, giggling, while teenagers lined up backstage to adjust costumes and whisper last-minute lines. Tyler leaned against the wall near the entrance, munching on a pretzel, half watching the stage, half scrolling on his phone. Then he looked up and froze. Margaret Foster had just walked through the door. She wore a simple floral dress, soft pinks and purples, and carried her cane gently in one hand. Her hair was pinned neatly. She looked calm, graceful. Not embarrassed, not confused. Just ready. Tyler elbowed his friend. Tyler swayed. No way, she actually came. Friend one turned to look, his jaw dropping slightly. Friend one whispering, "Dude, what if she actually sings?" Tyler didn't answer. Margaret approached the check-in table. She smiled politely and signed her name. The young volunteers barely noticed her as they passed out numbered badges. She clipped hers on carefully and began walking toward the backstage area. People didn't stare exactly, but they noticed. Some whispered, others chuckled softly, assuming she was lost or confused. She kept walking steady and sure. Backstage, the lights were dimmer. Performers lined up in nervous rows. A girl in a sparkly tutu practiced her twirls. A boy played scales on his trumpet, off-key but determined. Margaret moved quietly past them. No one really paid her any attention, except for one, a little girl, no more than 9, stood by herself near a chair, holding a small ukulele. Her name tag read Lily in careful handwriting. She looked up as Margaret passed and gave her a shy smile. "Lily, are you nervous?" Margaret paused and looked down at her. Then she smiled. "Margaret, a little. It's been a long time since I've done something like this." Lily nodded seriously. "Lily, my grandma says bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing it anyway." Margaret blinked, surprised, and then smiled again, this time more deeply. Something in her chest loosened. "Margaret, your grandma sounds like a very wise woman." "Lily, she is. She says the only people who don't feel scared are the ones who aren't doing anything that matters." Margaret's eyes softened. She leaned down slightly and whispered, "Margaret, then I guess this must matter a lot." They smiled at each other, just for a moment. Then a voice called from the stage, "Next up, Lily Jenkins with a ukulele performance." Lily turned to go but paused and looked back. "Lily, you're going to be amazing." Margaret watched her walk off, heart full. Then she looked down at her hands and they weren't trembling anymore. The house lights dimmed slightly. The host stepped onto the stage, glancing down at the card in his hand. He gave a quick, uncertain smile to the crowd. Host a light chuckle in his voice. "All right, folks. Our next act is Margaret Foster, singing a solo piece. Let's give her a warm welcome." There was a ripple of confused murmurs. A few people clapped, politely unsure. A couple of teenagers laughed under their breath. Tyler smirked in his seat and nudged his friend. But then the stage lights shifted. A single spotlight warmed the center of the stage, and from the shadows Margaret appeared. Slowly, steadily, she walked forward with her cane, her figure calm and poised. Her floral dress glowed gently in the light, and her eyes, behind those signature glasses, scanned the crowd. The laughter stopped. People shifted in their seats. Even Tyler leaned forward slightly. She reached the microphone and stood in silence for a moment. Then she spoke, Margaret softly, but clearly, "This song is for the dreams we put away, and for the people who think it's too late." The room hushed completely. And then, the first soft piano chords began to play, a gentle, familiar melody, "Climb every mountain" from the sound of music. She took a breath, not rushed, not uncertain, just still. And then she sang. The first note floated gently into the air, carried on breath and memory. Her voice was not the voice of a 19-year-old girl. It was something else, something deeper. A voice with weight, with time behind it, worn in all the right ways. The song built slowly, each phrase carrying more than just notes, carrying everything she hadn't said, hadn't done, hadn't sung in all those years. No one moved. A mother in the front row stopped mid-text and stared at the stage, blinking. A teenager backstage froze, mouth slightly open. Tyler's smirk faded. Margaret's voice climbed, unwavering with a swell of feeling. Her hands, still gripping the microphone, no longer trembled. Her eyes closed gently as she hit the chorus. "Climb every mountain forward, every stream follow, every rainbow, till you find your dream." By the second verse, you could feel it, the shift in the room, that hush when something real happens, that moment when time stops. People who'd come expecting to be entertained were now holding their breath. And she kept going, stronger now, not louder, just fuller, like she'd found something she thought she'd lost. Then she sang, and the moment the first note left her lips, the room changed. It was subtle at first, the way heads turned, the way laughter stopped mid-breath. A hush fell, not from courtesy but awe. Her voice was rich, soulful, unwavering. It filled the air with something powerful, something that didn't belong to any one time or age. It wasn't perfect in the polished, studio way. It was better. It was real. It was a voice that had lived. In the second row, a woman's jaw dropped slightly, her hand rising instinctively to her chest. Beside her, a teenage boy slowly lowered his phone, forgetting why he'd even raised it. Tyler sat up straight, his smirk gone. He stared at the stage, completely still, unsure if what he was hearing was even possible. And near the side curtain, Lily watched wide-eyed, her small ukulele clutched to her chest. Her lips parted just slightly, as if the song had floated into her soul and taken root. Somewhere near the back, an elderly woman leaned forward in her chair, eyes glistening. Elderly woman whispering. That voice, it's like hearing a prayer. A man turned to her, visibly moved. Man in crowd, where has she been all this time? The music swelled, and so did her voice. She was no longer standing on a stage in a community center, not in her mind. She was in that old studio again, microphone before her. But this time there was no one to stop her. No one to say she wasn't pretty enough. No one to tell her no, she owned the stage. And the audience, they didn't just hear her. They felt her every word, every rise and fall, every ounce of heart. It was as if the song had peeled back the years and reminded everyone in that room of something they'd forgotten. That beauty doesn't fade with age, and dreams don't have expiration dates. The final note lingered in the air, soft in silence, not the awkward kind, the holy kind, the kind that follows something sacred. The final note soared, echoing through the auditorium like it had wings. Then silence, a beat, another, and then the room exploded. Applause crashed like a wave. Chairs scraped back as people leapt to their feet. Cheers rang out wild and unfiltered, rising higher than the music ever had. People clapped with everything they had, some with hands trembling, others wiping away tears as they did. The woman in the second row was openly crying now. The man beside her cheered with both hands raised. Tyler sat frozen for a moment. The world around him roared, but he stayed still, the shock still sinking in. Then slowly, almost ashamed, he stood and clapped too. Tyler softly, to no one in particular. I didn't know. His friend stood beside him, clapping just as slowly, but with a look of deep guilt in his eyes. Friend too, so quietly, we tried to humiliate her, and she just became the best part of this entire show. Back on stage, Margaret stood in the spotlight, her hand lightly resting on the microphone, her breath still catching. Her chest rose and fell with the effort, but her eyes, they sparkled. I live free, she was smiling not just with her lips but with every part of her. From the side of the stage, Lily ran out, clutching a bunch of mismatched flowers she'd grabbed from one of the decoration tables. She rushed up to Margaret and held them out with both hands, eyes glowing. Lily, you were amazing. Margaret's hands trembled as she took the flowers. Her eyes welled with tears, not the quiet kind, but the kind that came from somewhere deep and long forgotten. Margaret, tearfully, her voice cracking, thank you, sweetheart. She pulled Lily into a gentle hug as the applause continued, rolling like thunder through the walls of the little community center. And for a moment, just a moment, time seemed to stop. The old librarian with the flower hats and thick glasses, the woman who people once walked past without a second glance, now stood in the center of the room like a star that had finally remembered how to shine. Backstage, the noise of the crowd still echoed faintly, muffled behind thick curtains. Margaret sat in a folding chair, bouquet in her lap, still catching her breath. The adrenaline had faded, but something else lingered. A deep, quiet peace. The host approached her, his usual easy confidence replaced with genuine reverence. He rubbed the back of his neck as if unsure how to begin. Host Mrs. Foster, I just wanted to say that was incredible, truly. You moved the whole town tonight. Margaret looked up at him with a soft, gracious smile. Host a little nervous, hopeful. Would you maybe consider performing again next year? She chuckled gently, her eyes crinkling. Margaret, we'll see. One dream at a time. The host nodded, understanding that some things don't need planning. Some things simply happen when the moment is finally ready for them. As she stood to leave, volunteers made way for her like she was royalty, but she didn't carry herself that way. There was no trace of ego, only quiet pride. Her cane clicked gently against the floor as she made her way toward the exit. Outside, the evening air was cool, soft. The stars had begun to show. Narrator. Word of her performance spread through Willow Spring like a spark. Someone had filmed it on their phone. Then someone else shared it. By morning, it was all over town. The local news ran a segment. They called it the Voice of Willow Spring. Strangers dropped off flowers at her doorstep. Old students sent her letters. Parents told their kids about the night a 78-year-old woman reminded everyone what it meant to chase a dream. But for Margaret, none of that mattered. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't chasing applause. What mattered was that after all these years she was finally heard. Really heard. And for the first time in a very long time, Margaret Foster didn't feel like a forgotten chapter. She felt like a story just beginning. The sun was warm that afternoon, casting soft golden light over the park. Birds chirped in the trees, and children's laughter floated from the playground nearby. Margaret sat alone on a weathered wooden bench, the same one she visited every morning with her tea. She watched the leaves dance in the breeze, her cane resting beside her, a small smile on her face. Footsteps approached, hesitant ones. She glanced to her side. Tyler stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched slightly. His face carried something unfamiliar, humility. Tyler's quietly Mrs. Foster. She turned to face him gently. Margaret, yes? He took a breath, eyes cast toward the grass. Tyler, I'm sorry. I put your name in for the talent show as a joke. I didn't think you'd actually come, and I definitely didn't think you'd blow us all away like that. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. Margaret, softly, kindly, well, thank you. You gave me a reason to try again. He blinked at her, unsure what to say. Tyler, you made me realize how dumb it is to judge someone by their age. You weren't just good. You were the best part of that whole night. She smiled at that, not smug, not proud, just content. Margaret, it's never too late to learn, Tyler. And it's never too late to sing. He nodded, eyes a little glassy. They sat there for a while, a teenager and an old woman, both changed in different ways by the same moment. No more jokes, just respect. And maybe a quiet beginning of something better, a new year, a new flyer. Taped to lamp posts, pinned to bulletin boards, slipped into mailboxes around Willow Spring. Willow Spring's Got Spark, featuring last year's winner Margaret Foster. Inside the community center, the energy buzzed once again. Laughter, nerves, whispered rehearsals, folding chairs filling up fast. But this time there was a quiet reverence in the air. People weren't just here for fun. They were here for her. Backstage, Margaret stood tall. The cane that once steadied her steps had been left behind, traded for something lighter, more powerful. A microphone. She wore the same floral dress, though now it looked like a queen's robe, her hair pinned up neatly, her glasses perched with quiet pride. She took one breath, slow, steady, then walked onto the stage. The crowd erupted before she sang a single note. In the front row, Lily sat up straight, clutching a small notepad filled with lyrics and dreams of her own. She smiled so brightly it seemed to light the room. Margaret looked out, not nervous this time, not uncertain. She belonged here. Narrator, sometimes life gives you second chances in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, the quietest voices carry the deepest songs. This time, Margaret didn't walk on stage as a joke. She walked on as a legend, and somewhere, deep in the hearts of everyone watching, something awakened. A reminder that no dream is ever too old, too dusty, or too late. All it needs is one voice brave enough to sing it.